The story begins with a whisper in the marble halls of Washington, a whisper that would soon grow into a roar. Chief Justice John Roberts, the man long portrayed as the steady hand guiding the nation's highest court, now stood at the center of an explosive allegation. According to an anonymous source deep inside the judicial system, Roberts had been involved in private conversations with key political strategists just weeks before the court's controversial ruling on a sweeping electoral reform bill. The ruling, which narrowly upheld new state-level voting restrictions, had already divided the country. But if these whispers were true, if the Chief Justice himself had tipped the scales, the implications would be seismic. Into this storm stepped Representative Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in Congress known for her sharp wit, uncompromising stance on justice, and ability to turn complex issues into rallying cries. She had built her career on fighting entrenched power, and this time she was taking on the most powerful judge in America. Her first move was bold, a televised press conference outside the Supreme Court, where she called for an immediate investigation into Roberts's alleged back-channel communications. The gathered crowd, a mix of reporters and activists, buzzed with tension as Crockett laid out her case, speaking with the precision of a prosecutor and the fire of a street organizer. "This is not just about one ruling," she declared, her voice cutting through the chill air. "This is about the integrity of our democracy. If the highest court cannot remain impartial, then justice itself is on trial." The moment she stepped away from the podium, cameras surged forward, the news cycle ignited, and a collision course between Crockett and Roberts was set into motion. Within 24 hours of Jasmine Crockett's press conference, the headlines had shifted from cautious speculation to full-blown national scandal. Leaked emails, allegedly obtained from a confidential source within the judiciary, appeared to show Roberts exchanging cryptic messages with a well-connected political operative. The language was guarded, almost coded, but analysts quickly tied the timing of the messages to pivotal moments in the electoral reform case. News networks ran split-screen segments. On one side, the solemn face of Chief Justice Roberts; on the other, Crockett's fiery speech from the steps of the court. Social media exploded, with hashtags like #JusticeOnTrial and #Crockett versus Roberts trending globally. Roberts's defenders argued the leaks were fabricated, a calculated smear campaign designed to undermine the court's credibility. But Crockett wasn't backing down. She doubled her media presence, appearing on morning shows, podcasts, and primetime interviews, always steering the conversation back to the same core question. If our courts aren't clean, how can our democracy be? Behind the scenes, her team was building a dossier, meticulously cross-referencing phone logs, travel records, and meeting schedules. She knew this wasn't just about winning a news cycle. It was about exposing a system that protected the powerful while demanding obedience from everyone else. Meanwhile, Roberts maintained a strategic silence, releasing only a brief statement through the court's press office, denying any impropriety. But to Crockett, silence wasn't a shield. It was an admission. She sensed momentum shifting in her favor, and like a seasoned fighter, she pressed forward, determined to land the blow that could shake the judicial branch to its core. The more Roberts tried to retreat into silence, the louder Crockett's voice became. Her speeches began weaving in historical references, comparing the moment to the great judicial crises of the past, where the integrity of the court had been called into question. She didn't mince words. She framed Roberts as a man whose loyalty was divided, not between political parties, but between the ideals of justice and the interests of a shadowy network that thrived in secrecy. Cable news channels replayed her sound bites in looping montages, each clip more damning than the last. The leaked documents kept coming, this time not just emails, but travel vouchers and hotel receipts that placed Roberts at discreet closed-door gatherings with individuals directly tied to lobby groups involved in the contested legislation. Analysts pored over the evidence, drawing lines between dates, rulings, and meetings, building a picture of influence that was hard to ignore. Public trust numbers began to slip. Polls showed the court's approval rating dropping to its lowest in over 2 decades. Still, Roberts maintained the stoic demeanor of a man convinced the storm would pass. Crockett saw that composure not as strength, but as calculation, and she told her supporters exactly that. "When the truth hurts," she said at a rally in Dallas, "power hides behind protocol." It was a simple phrase, but it stuck, appearing on protest signs and in profile bios across social platforms. Even some of Roberts's longtime allies in the legal community began calling for a public hearing to address the growing allegations. And Crockett, sensing the walls closing in, began to prepare her most explosive revelation yet, a piece of evidence she claimed would pull the curtain back on the quiet corridors of influence that had been hidden from the public eye for far too long. The day of the revelation felt electric. Reporters crowded the Capitol steps, their cameras trained on the podium where Jasmine Crockett stood, a slim folder clutched in her hand. The sun glinted off the marble columns behind her, as if the building itself was bracing for what was about to unfold. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who knew this was the moment history would remember. She began with context, how the judicial branch had always been the safeguard of democracy, and how betrayal from within cut deeper than any external attack. Then she opened the folder. Inside were memos, not just from lobbyists, but from Roberts' own chambers, showing drafts of judicial opinions edited after private meetings with corporate representatives. The edits weren't cosmetic. They subtly shifted legal interpretations in ways that favored a small circle of powerful interests. As she read excerpts aloud, audible gasps rippled through the crowd. The memos bore dates, signatures, and marginal notes written in Roberts' unmistakable hand. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was a direct link between the Chief Justice and a chain of influence that had undermined impartial rulings. Social media erupted within minutes, hashtags calling for resignation trending worldwide. Roberts, still silent, became a living portrait of embattled authority, his usual reserve now interpreted as guilt. Commentators debated whether this was a constitutional crisis or a cleansing moment for the judiciary. Crockett didn't let the narrative drift. She pressed harder, urging the Senate to initiate a formal inquiry. She framed it not as a partisan battle, but as a fight for the soul of the Republic, daring anyone to look away. And for the first time, even the most cautious voices in Washington began to admit, Roberts might not survive this. By the next morning, the weight of the scandal pressed against every wall of Washington. Major newspapers ran full-page spreads with bold headlines declaring justice in question. Editorial boards that had once tiptoed around criticism of the court now spoke openly about the threat posed by a compromised Chief Justice. Jasmine Crockett, undeterred by the enormity of her opponent's title, moved with the precision of a litigator who smelled blood in the water. She arranged back-to-back interviews, not with partisan outlets, but with respected middle-ground voices who rarely entertained controversy. In each appearance, she reframed the story, not as a clash of personalities, but as a clear moral divide between those willing to protect judicial integrity and those willing to sell it. The public mood shifted from shock to anger, and the pressure on Roberts grew intolerable. Calls for his resignation poured in from law professors, former clerks, even some of his longtime allies on the bench. Whispers spread that junior justices were holding quiet discussions about how to distance themselves from his shadow. Still, Roberts remained silent, issuing no public defense, perhaps hoping the storm would pass. But Crockett anticipated this. That afternoon, she stood before a packed committee hearing and unveiled her most damning piece of evidence yet: a recorded conversation between a corporate lobbyist and a man whose voice, matched by forensic audio experts, was Roberts himself. The recording revealed casual discussions about how upcoming rulings could align with broader economic interests, phrased in the kind of language no impartial judge would ever use. The room went still. Even seasoned lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Crockett let the silence stretch, then delivered a single line that would be replayed for weeks. "If this is justice, then justice has been bought and sold." The release of the audio recording detonated like a political earthquake. Overnight, it became the lead story not only in Washington but in every major city across the country. Protesters gathered outside the Supreme Court, holding signs that read, "Justice for sale" and "Roberts must go." Editorial cartoons depicted the Chief Justice with price tags dangling from his robe. Even typically cautious legal commentators admitted the evidence was devastating. Inside the marble halls of the court, the atmosphere turned cold. Clerks avoided eye contact, and justices who once exchanged cordial banter with Roberts now kept their conversations brief and formal. Jasmine Crockett, sensing the momentum, pushed further. She filed a formal petition to initiate an ethics investigation, a rare move against a sitting Chief Justice. Though the process was symbolic, its impact was anything but. It signaled that Congress was willing to publicly challenge the court's top figure, shattering the illusion of untouchable authority. Meanwhile, allies of Roberts scrambled to mount a defense, but every attempt backfired. Claims that the audio was taken out of context collapsed when independent analysts verified its authenticity. An attempted smear campaign against Crockett fizzled after journalists uncovered the fingerprints of a notorious political operative tied to pro-corporate interests. The tide was no longer turning. It had turned. Public approval ratings for the court hit record lows, and private polling suggested that even among conservative voters, trust in Roberts had been severely damaged. In the corridors of power, an unspoken truth was taking root. Jasmine Crockett was not just exposing a scandal. She was altering the balance of judicial accountability in America. Roberts, once the unshakable figure at the pinnacle of the legal system, now looked like a man cornered, his options dwindling by the hour. The final blow came not in a courtroom, but in the heart of the Senate chamber, under the blinding lights of a nationally televised ethics hearing. Roberts, seated stiffly at the witness table, tried to project calm, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett's tone was steady, surgical. She presented a timeline of suspicious case rulings, matching them with campaign donations and private meetings, each point reinforced by documents and sworn testimonies. With every question, Roberts's denials grew weaker, his answers more hesitant. The packed gallery leaned forward, sensing history in the making. By the time Crockett played the unedited recording, Roberts's own voice suggesting flexible interpretations for friendly entities, the room fell into a stunned silence. Senators shifted uncomfortably. Even members of Roberts's traditional allies avoided his gaze. The hearing concluded with a bipartisan call for the Chief Justice to step down for the good of the court. Within 48 hours, Roberts announced his resignation, citing personal reasons. The resignation sent shockwaves through the legal and political landscape, but to millions watching at home, it was a vindication. Crockett emerged from the building to a crowd chanting her name, reporters jostling for a statement. "This was never about me," she said into the sea of microphones. "This was about the integrity of our democracy and the principle that no one, not even the Chief Justice, is above the law." That clip played on repeat across every major network, cementing her as a rising force in American politics. For weeks afterward, her inbox flooded with messages from ordinary citizens thanking her for restoring their faith in justice. The scandal would be studied for years as a turning point in judicial accountability, but for now, one thing was clear. Jasmine Crockett had faced the highest legal authority in the nation, and won. If you believe in holding the powerful accountable, stay informed, stay engaged, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss the stories they don't want you to hear.